I declare this meeting of the Risk and Assurance Committee open and ask Janine to lead us in a karakia, please.
Chair, whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia makina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. He hiaka, aki ana te atakura, he io, he ua, he hauhu, tihe, maurio.
Thank you. I see we're either all here or online, and we have an apology for lateness from Warren. He'll be online shortly. Can we? Lateness? Okay, so we need a mover and seconder. Thank you, Pamela. Thank you, Chris. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So we now move on to the confirmation of the agenda, and we've got a resolution here just confirming that the agenda is the business of the committee for today, and that secondly, the meeting may sit for longer than 2 hours continuously and continue for longer than 6 hours if needed. I have a mover and seconder. Thank you, Pamela. Thank you, Chris. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Which brings us to disclosures of interest. Does any committee member have any new interests that they want to disclose at this time? I'll take that as a no. So we'll move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. So we need are there any amendments that any members would like to raise in connection with those minutes of that last meeting, the 21st of June? Take that as a no. So can we again have a mover and seconder, please? Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Paul. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. So now that brings us to the matters arising. Janine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, councillors. Happy to take the report as read. Probably just a few points there that I'd like to highlight in taking that as read. First one, in relation to the testing of the protected disclosures policy, and the chair or CE may want to comment on this as well. We have been in the process of doing actual tests of the policy as requested by the committee. One in terms of a notified process, so expect to receive something and we'll walk through the process through the policy requirements, as well as a second test where the receivers of the notifications won't be aware of the timing of it. Certainly with the work that's been done, there's been some great feedback that has come out as a result of the actual physical testing of the policy. That is being incorporated, as will any learnings that come out from the second testing, and we will bring that back to the committee for approval inclusive of those changes. But overall, that's been a really, really worthwhile process to work through. Probably there's just a couple of health and safety points that are noted in here as well from previous minutes. So item number 3, which was a query from members around the residual risk associated with our common health and safety risks. The advice that's been given by the health and safety team is that the residual risk rating cannot be reduced to low because of the consequence of that risk materialising unable to be reduced significantly to change that risk rating. That might be something that elected members or committee members have further questions on. We have Stu Brown, who's the Executive Manager of People and Capability, in the meeting later today. May be able to respond to that if you do have any questions. Also just number 7, noting the application of council's health and safety policies to elected members when they're undertaking specific work that is related to their role, as well as the availability of EAP services and the reporting mechanisms around threat, aggression and violence events. And the final matter was just number 8, again connected with health and safety, around that risk rating for the psychological harm, workplace psychological harm, to make sure that that's calibrated with our organisational risk framework, and the team have confirmed that that is the case. So happy, other than that, happy to take any questions on any of the other matters.
Thank you, Janine. Any questions? No? I have one. I've noticed that some councils where they found either consultation meetings or public meetings have degenerated into chaos. And I just wondered, with this council, do you have an assessment of that done before the meeting takes place? And do you have a plan B or a retreat plan if be activated?
I don't know. I'm thinking about that.
I know that on previous occasions where either there has been messaging received by council ahead of particular meetings about particular agenda items, or if there has been, say, an event that is coinciding. I know that there have been risk assessments done, and at times additional security has been brought in, and there's been planning around ensuring health and safety is looked after. But that is in response to either messages we have received or our own assessment of agenda items that might instigate that type of necessary analysis. I do take up your point, though, around councils that are seeing this on a more regular basis, having just come back from a regional sector meeting last week. I had conversations with other regional council chairs that were engaging more regular security in the face of increasing activity in this space.
Yeah.
If you want to add.
No, thank you, Councillor Story. I think that's correct. Where we have had an intelligence that there could be potential for disruption, we've put extra provisions in place, and we've even tried to contact organisers and indicate what our expectations are and what we'd do. Fortunately, we haven't really had a lot of that experience, but there's as much potential for where there's consultation meetings going on and so on as there is for probably some of our own public meetings, and the key staff organising it are always mindful of it, but I'd have to say it's something that we haven't had an issue. There has been matters raised by councillors about their own security in the past, and we've had a look at that, and that might not be just physical security, that might be their security in terms of what they receive through digital networks and whatever.
The case I was thinking about, they had no warning that this was a possibility. And I just thought, I think growing trend towards this, greater people protesting and voicing their satisfaction, and with council's obligations to councillors as well as staff, I think you need to take that into sure you are doing in terms of the act or practical actions to staff and councillors' meetings.
And through you, Chair, that I'll just need to, on the back of those comments, I'll need to remind myself what our policies and procedures are. Certainly we have security procedures as to dealing with things which are disruptive but not a security concern. Myself.
Particularly if we're off-site from here, another environment, having done that.
And I suppose just through you, Mr. Chair, just as part of that, reminding ourselves what our policies are, I think that there is warrant for ensuring that that is a point of discussion, particularly for our, well, starting with our formal meetings here within this office, but you know, just ensuring that that's a regular check-in point for us, because I think we do it a bit ad hoc right now. That's my impression.
Sorry, I just want to take in, Robbie, you had a question or comment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. All I'd like to say to that, and I'm driving in now to come to the meeting, but I've been to a couple of meetings now where staff have actually felt maybe not unsafe, but they don't like the wording that's in the room. They've been put in an awkward, and I've put myself in that position twice now where I've had to calm the situation down, apologise for what's taken place, and said, if you're going to give anyone a blood nose in the room, you give it to me and leave staff out of it. So that's happened twice to us. So I sort of, it's an interesting thing where you got to defuse it. We actually most probably need a bit of help for how to defuse situations instead of escalating. Because when it's in a public arena, it can get out of control really quickly if you don't just escalate it. Yeah, so that's all I wanted to say. And I've been in that situation twice already as a councillor. So yeah, thank you.
Paul. This is kind of a related issue, and it's something which the other side of the Bombays, we have quite a lot of gun violence in the last 12 months, perhaps, including a big incident downtown. So some organisations are considering what they would do if there was an active shooter on the premises. And I'm involved with one organisation for security, so I won't tell you much about it, but I can tell you offline. But that actually has a complete procedure of lockdown with some technology as well. This is a Wellington-based entity, so I'm not saying that you need to do something, but it's just something to consider whether you have a policy and a procedure, and whether staff know what, if something happens really serious out there, who's going to tell me where to go and what to do?
Yes, certainly we do have security procedures in place for lockdown type arrangements. And in fact, we had a situation about a year ago where I got involved in it with disruption in reception where things did lock down. We have done a review of that. One of the concerns that was raised with some of our staff who have background corrections and police training, whether if they want to, should be able to get involved or not, given what our lockdown policies are, and the fact that it took about 20 minutes for police to actually arrive at the offices. All's well that ends well, but things could be very different and escalate very quickly, just in the way that you suggested. I think that we've got good lockdown security procedures, and council laws advised what they are at the start. Some of the issues become, what about the members of our public who are present at the time? And the one I was talking about, there's a young woman with a baby in reception when the disruption occurred, and how we deal with situations like that. And I know that there's a security review post that, and I probably need to find the details of that.
Thanks, Chris. But I just raise it because I think there's a definite change going on, and we need to make sure we're the head of the curve to make sure that policies and processes are right up there. If there are no more questions, do we have a mover and seconder to receive that report? Paul? Thank you, Jennifer. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Risk management activities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So by way of introducing the report, this is our normal risk management activity update, which covers a few levels in terms of that general environmental scan and areas of either current or emerging risk, an update in terms of our risk rating across Council's strategic risks, as well as the deep dive into two of our strategic risks. But I wonder whether, in terms of that risk environment, an opportunity for the Chief Executive to provide some insights on that. To the committee.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So there's probably three things which exercise my mind mostly at the moment. One obviously is still around the economy. We still have a high inflationary environment, high cost of borrowing going on, what that means for us as an organisation, what that means for our communities. That means some of that pressure is not going away. And you segue that into our long-term plan. It probably is one of the more difficult long-term plans that we need to work through at the moment, with some of the ever increasing additional responsibilities, increasing cost pressures, different views about what our leadership role is for dealing with those, and we're working through that. Certainly, I think we're possibly in a better starting position than other councils I talk to around the country, which is a little bit of relief, but it doesn't make it any easier all the same. The other big one out there is the elections, obviously. Post the elections, what will the form of the government look like? What will be the speed at which they make decisions, and what that means for us? And again, that segues into our long-term plan, because councils are having to kind of work with the status quo, but with polls which are indicating the status quo might not be the case. And it's a tricky environment out here at the moment in local government, in the middle of all of those things.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. I certainly agree with your comments. I think this LTP is going to be a very challenging one for all councils because of the environment that we're currently operating in.
So if we just revert back to the report, so in terms of that environmental scan, those same sort of issues are reflected in there, together with, I guess, the legislative reform program and the status of a lot of that. Landing of the Future for Local Government panel's recommendations, which largely aligned with the Council's own submission on that topic. But obviously from here, it is a sector-led response rather than a government-led response to any changes that may result from there. We note there in terms of the freshwater farm plans and that legislation coming into place, in place, particularly for the Waikato region from the 1st of August, and where our responsibilities lie in that space. The committee's heard on a number of occasions around our emergency response capability. So an update's been provided there around the focus that has been placed on staff training at all three levels of the integrated training framework, with 246 staff having completed that training, and a push still occurring to make sure that we've got staff, particularly at that intermediate and functional lead level, coming through. In terms of the strategic risks, so a review of those is provided for your information and review, noting the, I think it's five risks where we still have residual risks exceeding Council's risk appetite. to take a step back in terms of the risk management work, this report reflects the risk review workshops that were facilitated by KPMG, the testing and setting of revised risk appetite by council, risk appetite statements, and is seeing that interconnectivity of risk conversation being wound through the reviews as well. So looking more broadly at change in one area of risk and what impact that will have across the total risk landscape. There were 2 deep dives that have been undertaken through this period, and they are probably the key strategic risks where we have seen change as a result of the review of the top 10. So a new risk around giving effect to TTIP and the revision to council's financial sustainability risk as well, which was folding in what we had previously as a separate risk around planning, acknowledging that planning is a response around managing council's financial sustainability. So the report sets out the key findings from those deep dives in those 2 areas, as well as some key insights across other risk areas from a TTIP perspective, noting that the ability to build our internal capacity and capability, we can train for that, but one of the other responses is actually embedding those considerations into our recruitment strategy. So as we're looking for staff, that we're actually looking for those characteristics rather than having to build it all from within. Noting the importance of relationships and the way that we engage with iwi, so trying to make sure where possible that those conversations are joined up with other agencies, so we are not overwhelming iwi from the demand of engagement that is coming their way, and again looking around those relationships for legislative compliance. In terms of financial sustainability, which is on page 48 of the agenda, again noting those pressures that have been referenced already a couple of times around the economic drivers, so the high CPI that has been running historically, and I think the general view is that that will continue for a longer period of time than had previously been anticipated, and as well as high CPI, seeing those high interest rates also compounding the pressures that are on our community, but that they will be impacting for this organisation as well as we're doing our long-term planning. Also noting, I guess, the broadening of this risk around financial sustainability, which is really resilience in the way that we manage and fund our activities, and the impact that those severe weather events and our need to respond to those is shifting as well. Noting there the increasing risks around insurance retreat, or is at least escalating insurance premiums, and the need for council to be a much more strategic purchaser in some of those spaces, but informed by good asset management in terms of what the future of particular assets is, what we need to cover, potentially what we don't need to cover. And again, some key insights noted there under section 45 of the report, looking at that risk interconnectivity. Perhaps I'll pause there, Mr. Chair, for any feedback on those points or comments in the committee, and then we can put legislative compliance noted as well.
Thank you, Janine. Questions?
Kia ora. I had a question in regards to the interconnected risks picture. It's just since the key wasn't fulsome, there was, I think I can deduce that the light coloured lines are like a weak connection and the dark coloured line strong connection, but is there any significance to the circle that's on the image? whether the risk is inside the circle or outside the circle?
So through you, Mr. Chair, effectively, those are the key areas of the key emitters and receivers of risk. So that would be the focus for council in terms of understanding where all of those risks into play. That bit in the middle is where you see
The most
the
connection.
most connection.
Thank
So
you.
where you would be applying more focus from an interconnectivity perspective.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
This is a slightly random suggestion, but page 39B is talking about interrelationships and working with DOC. I just wonder whether you'd consider relationship with the Environmental Protection Authority, noting I'm a board member. It has a network called Te Haringa, which is a network of Māori interested in environmental issues, but they're probably more connected. So it's putting a lot of effort into and vitalising that the network. Secondly, assuming they don't have a government change and even gets tipped on its head, but this one won't. The EPA has certain duties under the new fast tracking proposal, including making recommendations to the minister as to whether things go through it. I mean, having a nice relationship with them wouldn't hurt.
Thank you for raising that. I really appreciate it. Couldn't agree more.
Right.
Sorry, I've got one other one.
Yes.
I'm not sure. All right, it came to mind. Are we going to the deep dives already on the two main ones? Financial intertwined? Cool, I just didn't want to jump ahead. I just note that yesterday at the joint management meeting with Waikato Tainui, it came up in the update on the process, just a challenge as to how to, I guess my question for you, Janine, would be, do you believe that the way we run the LTP process currently honours Te Tiriti the way that it could? Because the challenge was just put out and we were acknowledging that different councils do things differently. It just made us think. And so I just wanted to put it out there because there's the part around partnership where it's this line around, is it more than just giving the updates at the JMAs of where the process is at? Or is it further engagement, but noting that it's more than the submission process at the end? Yeah, could you give any thought to it? Or
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, we have explicitly had conversations around where are the opportunities for that early engagement with iwi. That's been, I think, a challenge for us in identifying those, and there hasn't been anything that has stood out outside of processes that we're already working through and engaging with them on. So it has been an explicit consideration as we've worked through of where should we be having those conversations. Certainly not an assumption that they just become another submitter to the process. So really keen for that engagement where we can, where it makes sense to do that. I think for me, the other aspect that's really important is the engagement that happened in the review and setting of council's strategic direction. If we've got that right, then the LTP should sort of flow from that in terms of giving effect to it. So the opportunity to engage with iwi and setting our direction and making sure that that's well aligned is key to then inform some of that LTP work that flows as well.
appreciate that. We did definitely note as well with the challenge of the larger geography than say the district councils given as well is resourcing and the desire to want to treat iwi equitably across the region is a challenge. And so no, I just appreciate that you're thinking about it and we're working through that over and obviously there's that engagement at the implementation level anyway as well.
Yeah, and I think at our last workshop last week, there was the invitation made to councillors around any areas that they thought there was an opportunity for pre-engagement on to highlight those. So if we're not seeing it, or if you're interested in being able to do that, then we're definitely open to receiving that feedback and then working out how we can best achieve that. So that would include that iwi pre-engagement and
It's great, thanks.
participation as well.
It was a new thing for me, how it raised around how marae and hapu voices would be good to bring in rather than the people sitting around the JMA table, let's say iwi. So they gave some suggestions there. Could be arranged at least with Wakarutangi. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Also, recognising in our terms of reference to consider emerging risks with this committee, can I ask that we get an update on whether anything has significantly changed as a consequence of the Wakari White Island court case? Because I certainly have found it quite difficult to understand the reason for some of the parties being at such a late stage removed from the proceedings. And I just thought this may have a significant bearing. We should be ensuring that we are cognizant of any changes. Chris.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I've got very limited understanding of it, but what I've been told is it was a direct result of admissions of failure by WorkSafe themselves in terms of the review of the procedures being adopted by various parties and the safety processes that they put in place and their methods of communication. It basically WorkSafe's the one that's fault rather than the participating parties. So,
Thank you.
Yes, so the company that owns the island is still being charged. Directors aren't because there was no evidence brought as to the content of board meeting. So again, that's just WorkSafe didn't do a good job. They didn't think it through properly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can I ask you again, just to, I don't know if this is out of the box, but I mean, clearly the AMP is going to be the big deal going forward. I mean, we've got the long-term plan, but the asset management plan is the guts of that. And so there's some commentary, which is on papers, page 55, second box. But also reading the valuation report, I didn't get a strong sense of the extent to which information is based on asset condition, inspected asset condition, as opposed to sort of tables. And, you know, it was built in this date and sort of it should last so many years. And I know, and there are comments here about modelling climate resilience. So I think, and there's an improvement in condition monitoring. So where are we at, Chris, on the sort of condition monitoring as opposed to just having standard historical information in the system? Because that's going to drive the AMP, I guess, and drive the response to climate threats, which we have to model.
I was just thinking, well, I saw
We've got the
Greg
right-
in the room before, but
Well, we've got
the other guys here.
yeah. So there's a couple of people in the room who will be great to answer those questions.
But just before they do, and I don't know, Dave or Sean, if you can respond to the question, I think there's a growing recognition that because of the potential liabilities that might ensue in the changing world that we're going into, be it for climate change reasons or the way insurance works and whatever, that, you know, we need to make sure any of our assets that are built need to be designed by engineers to a spec. They need to be signed off as they're built to those specifications, and that asset management condition needs to be monitored. I think that's becoming increasingly important with some of what we're seeing that's happening around the country after some of these big floods. I think so, absolutely. Guys, you might be able to help respond to the question.
Maybe if I can just jump in before they do. And Chris wasn't at the meeting yesterday, he was on leave, which is all great. We actually had a presentation by the reliability engineer within the asset management, integrated catchment management directorate, who is leading a lot of that work effectively around that condition assessment. And I think that role's been in place for about 5 years now. Strongly endorsed by the Risk and Assurance Committee of the day, acknowledging the importance of that. And it was really great to actually see the progress that's being made in that space, and the more optimized way of operating as a consequence of having some of those skills and processes in-house. So Dave Wade
Morning.
and Sean Hodson here.
Morning.
So
Yeah, I think you probably answered the question there, Janine. So asset inspection, we do annual asset inspection. So that can be just visual checks and operational checks. And we also do structural audits. So that's where we have to dewater the areas, particularly around pump stations, floodgates, etc. And there's a full inspection. And from there, we determine what remedial action will be required in the next annual period. In some cases, and as Janine's just mentioned, we will take a decision to extend the interval of inspection based on the condition that we find. We may have to do immediate repairs, and that will happen during the course of that structural audit if we can. Otherwise, it goes into the next year's capital plan. Hopefully that answers the question.
yeah, and I think some of the other reflections that were coming through is where we've got some of the older assets and more bespoke types. The process of inspection being able to inform supply chain and demand. So where parts we don't have them and we need to get them in from overseas, we're actually able to schedule in the supply of those things rather than ending in a position where an asset's failed and we're having to respond. So yeah, I think quite a change that we're seeing in that space quite quickly. Well, over the last 5 years as a result of having some of those.
The assets management, asset maintenance planning is all based on inspections and condition, not on standard periods. You're out there looking at them, and obviously you can't do a structural review of everything all the time, but you do them when you need them.
Yeah,
So
correct.
there's a high- and is this all in the asset system?
In full, yes.
Yeah, for, yeah. Excellent.
Chris, did you want to say something?
A question through you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure who the right person is to address it, but I'd like to know what level of risk the council takes on in terms of internal engineers, qualified engineers, designing, supervising and signing off on these various projects, and how much of that is outsourced to external engineers, and where we rely on the undertakings given by them that the work is being done in accordance with specification. Because as far as I can see, there's a significant difference in risk profile between internally designed and managed projects as against externally designed and managed projects. And you get the situation like we had, and it's quite interesting. There's just been a small earthquake in Christchurch, and I reflect on the design of the building down there where it was an external engineer, and he's found guilty, but there's no comeback on him because he's disappeared. So I'm just interested in how we look at that from a risk perspective point of view.
I think that Greg Ryan's probably the best person to respond to it, but he would have missed part of the question. So if I understand it rightly, it was what's council's reliance on internal versus external expertise to be able to manage our engineering risks and
in difference in risk in terms of internal versus contracted residual risk to council.
So I guess the important thing for me is that regardless of what resource we're deploying into that space, whether it's engineering or project delivery or resource management, that council has its own very clear standards and requirements. We have our own infrastructure strategy, which sets that strategic direction. We have a regional asset management plan that provides much more detail around how those assets are to be managed from an engineering point of view. We have a number of standard practice designs as well that we apply to make sure that we have those there. So I guess that's, for me, there is always going to be that mix of internal and external expertise. And it sort of depends on the scale of the work program as well, and the ability to flex within that. But we should believe that we are in a position to make sure that we're always applying, we have very clear bottom line standards from an engineering and project delivery point of view. That helps the question. Sorry, I did miss most of that question and the discussion around it.
No, thank you. Jennifer, did you have a? Didn't. Right.
So if we've covered off those deep dives, just on page 59 of the agenda, bringing the committee's attention to the results from the latest Comply With survey. So this is a survey that our staff undertake to report on compliance with legislation and report on areas of partial or non-compliance. So Appendix 1 of the report notes those matters that have been identified by staff as partial compliance, noting the action plan that's associated with each of those. So that report has just been recently shared with the executive leadership team to make sure that there's visibility of these activities and to ensure that the proposed action plans are appropriate given the responses provided by staff.
Spotted the deliberate error. The action plan on number 1.
Page is that on, Paul?
62. Yeah. No, it shouldn't be. The first one is around the fall from height. And that is one that has been consistently reported as a partial compliance, noting the measures that are taken, and that has been reviewed by our health and safety team to make sure that it's appropriate. So yes, apologies. That action plan is in relation to the point directly below. Well spotted.
Sorry, any other questions? I had one on page 59. The status of corrective actions. What's the time frame for those being completed?
We've got Jonathan online. Jonathan, have you, some of these have got due dates noted beside them, but in terms of the other ones, have you got timeframes agreed with relevant staff?
I don't have, good morning all. I don't have timeframes agreed with them, but my practice is I check in with them on a monthly basis, just to sort of get an update on any sort of action plans, and then it gets reported into the next legislative compliance report in the next 6 monthly cycle. So at this stage, for those ones that don't have a date on them, it will be on a monthly basis. So I'll be checking in with them.
Okay, thank you. Right. Any further questions there? If we don't, can we have a mover and seconder to receive the that report, please? Yeah. It's good. I agree.
Thorough.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jennifer. All those in favour say aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you. Internal audit activity.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is the update on our internal audit program, noting the reviews that have been completed with action plans that are being monitored, and those are reported for you in the appendices to the report. Noting those engagements with KPMG that are currently in progress and pending final report preparation. So in particular, the business continuity and emergency management review, as well as the assurance mapping exercise that's been undertaken following the review of council strategy and those top 10 strategic risks, of revising what assurance activities we already have in place or have undertaken, with that information to be used to help inform a proposed 3-year internal audit program moving forward that will come to the next committee meeting. 2 reviews that are either currently underway or still planned. The asset management review, I think, is kicking off this week, and a project management framework review, while noted as being underway, I think underway as we have signed off on the terms of reference with that work to commence in early 2024. And as I say, accompanying the report is the status of the recommendations from those previous audits, in terms of those that have been closed and those that are still being worked on by staff.
Thank you, Janine. Any questions? No. So can we have a mover and seconder to receive the internal audit activity update, please? Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Pamela. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. Asset management maturity assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning.
Good morning.
So the paper brought for you today is one of a ongoing series of assessments that we undertake to determine how we are placed as council in terms of our asset management, and particularly around our flood protection and land drainage space. It's based on a consistent framework that we use to understand where we're at, where we want to be, and therefore setting targets to get there across the various areas of asset management. So I'd like to introduce to the committee 2 gentlemen today who will present the paper. I've got Dave Wade on my right. Dave is our Manager of Business and Technical Services. And I also have Sean Hodson on my left. Sean is a contractor who's been working with us on a number of asset management fronts, and including getting this particular piece of work done for us. You mentioned earlier, Janine, that there's an asset management review also happening in our internal audit program. And so this work will help to inform that process as well as it occurs. So I'll hand over to Sean.
Thank you, Greg. So what we'll talk about today, I just want to go over the Asset Management Maturity Assessment Process, or AMA, talk about what it is, the benefits of it, who can do it, what are our key results from this time round, what are the next steps in terms of the process of improving our asset management maturity. So just to start off, the system itself is a whole of life process. So we look at the full asset life cycle from concept, options, design, construct, right the way through its whole life cycle to removal of assets at the end of its life. It's a standardized system, and it's based on the International Infrastructure Management Manual. So it's a well-recognized process, very, very structured in its approach. And generally speaking, the assessment process follows a question followed by a set of statements which give you a relative maturity level, and then you can set a target from that point forward. The difference between your target and your score sets your action plan and your priorities. So it is endorsed by Treasury, and Treasury NZ have actually developed a tool themselves, which is an Excel spreadsheet-based system, which most councils and private entities can use. So it's a standardized process, pretty consistent in its approach, asks the same questions, and it's just the relative aspects of the answers that you get and the relative maturity or position that you want to be that influences what happens after that. Next slide, please. So the framework itself, it covers three main elements. One is your operating environment. So what do you do? How do you do it? Your life cycle planning, the process I just talked about in terms of from optioneering right the way through to construction and end of life. And also some of the enablers. So your policies, your procedures, and your management plans, etc. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of the benefits of AMA. It drives an improvement program that's very much so tailored to the organisation and to the goals and aspirations of that organisation. There's some little tables there which I've showed you. The asset management maturity assessment system can be used in different ways. It can be used to just improve your asset management maturity. And bearing in mind, this is not about chasing the score, it's about chasing real benefits and improvements. It can also be used as a risk tool. So KPMG in 2017 did a risk assessment based on the asset management maturity process. And as you can see there, there's quite a lot of red, orange, and a few greens in terms of our risk profile. I'm pleased to say that we've moved through a lot of the actions from that 2017 report with KPMG and have seen some pretty significant improvements. KPMG are back in WRC right now and repeating the assessment from 2017 as we speak. So it helps you in terms of your risk and again, action planning. And also you can benchmark your asset management maturity over time. And that's across 17 different elements, which I'll talk about shortly. And it can also be used as an organizational level, or it can be used at a team level. So for example, this year, typically ICM gets an asset management maturity assessment. This time we also included environmental monitoring team as well. So you can trend over time and you can see where you are at various points and also where your focus points want to be. Next slide, please. So maturity assessors, who can do this? Well, basically anybody. It's a relatively simple tool. It's got straightforward questions and straightforward answers, and you just pick the most appropriate answer to the position where you think you are as an organisation. So internal staff can do that if they so wish. What I've found across quite a number of organisations is that when internal staff undertake a maturity assessment, they tend to be more stringent on themselves than what an external assessor does. And that's because you can't see the wood for the trees normally. You're doing things and you think, oh, it's nothing special, but actually it can be. This time around, our external assessors, which is a Treasury recommended process, were ACOM. So they've come in, they've reviewed us, and for the first time for the first time, WRC involved a boots on the ground process as well as just the asset management team. So the process involved the asset management team, obviously, engineering delivery, because they're delivering projects and part of the life cycle, flood protection, land drainage, or our operations staff, the project management advisor, and as mentioned before, the environmental monitoring team, which was the first time audit on this one. And to be honest, without doing a spoiler alert, they did really, really well on the first time round. Next slide, please. Okay, so we set ourselves a target around about 2019 of 79%. As you can see from the table there, 79% is the top end of intermediate. And in terms of most local councils, intermediate is quite a good target to achieve. A lot of councils have been around core for at least 10, 15 years. So this is a long process journey. It's not something that you can tackle overnight. Our target of 79% is quite high in terms of a lot of councils. I'm pleased to say that our ICM score this time round was 64%, and that's a movement of 2%. 2% doesn't sound like it's a lot, but actually it's massive across 17 different elements that we score across. And environmental monitoring is a first time score at 50%, which as you can see from there is a good mid-core score, is excellent. And a lot of that is based on the current policies and procedures within WRC that have been adopted across the organisation, and therefore any team I would expect would score something relatively similar in terms of WRC. Next slide, please. Okay, so this time round, you'll see a radar diagram or a spider diagram there. That gives you an indication of where we started and where we've moved to, and our target score as well. The colour coordination there is not too brilliant. I normally like red, yellow and green, but we could actually do that one on this one. So the good news is we've made some significant improvements in some of the 17 elements, one of them being maintenance planning. And by significant, I mean a plus 15% movement, which is superb. Earlier on in the conversation, when me and Dave walked in through the door, you were talking about the reliability engineer and maintenance planning, etc. The reason for that massive increase in score is because WRC invested in those resources, and we've seen a significant improvement in our maintenance planning and also our asset condition assessment and the way that we approach risk and issues and asset failures, etc. So significant improvement there. Also a significant improvement in our information services. And this is primarily down to the adoption of Info and the policies and procedures and modules within that system. And again, that's seen significant improvement in our maturity score, again, plus 15% in terms of that movement in that particular area. There's been some improvements in other areas such as risk management, and that's because of the way that we undertake our risk across projects and other things. Our decision making has improved, and operational planning and reporting. And again, the operational planning and reporting is probably primarily down to Info and the systems that we use within Info. We have moved backwards in a couple of areas, capital investment strategies. And this is only a minor move, and that was down to having operations involved in the asset management maturity assessment this time round, so we can see the full project life cycle. If you do these things in isolation, you tend to get an isolated view. So having operational view of how capital investment is done and what the benefits on the ground was a good thing this time round, and it has helped us to formulate an action plan going forward and how we can improve that. The asset register data has gone backwards a little bit. And again, that's because our asset register wasn't as brilliant as what we thought it was in the old system of Conquest and Fulcrum. So we've been able to identify asset data gaps. And one of our major initiatives, as you'll see later on, is how to improve asset data going forward. Service delivery models is a bit of a strange one, and that's just because of the operating context that we've got. So if you're in private industry, for example, there's all sorts of different service delivery models that you might want to consider. So I wouldn't be unduly concerned about that one going backwards a little bit. It's just the interpretation from the assessors. Next slide, please. Okay, so our priority focus areas. Some of these are a bit of a repeat from last time round. Like I said, there is a journey that we're going on, and you can't achieve everything in one annual plan or one triennium, etc. So levels of service and performance management is one of our key areas. Asset register data, which I've already mentioned previously. Risk management, and that was more around synchronization of our risk registers across the organization. So the assessor picked up that we had project risk registers, we've got corporate risk registers, we've probably got risk registers which are directorate level and below. And the comment there was we need some form of consistency across it, which I believe we have got, but we'll look at risk anyway because it is a key one that we need to be involved in. And financial and fund strategies. This is around the sustainable infrastructure decision-making framework and some of that. So a lot of the stuff that the auditors or the assessors picked up on, we've already picked up on as well, and it's work in progress. And I'll tell you a little bit about our next steps and where I think we're going to be within 12 to 18 months in the next few slides. Next slide, please. Okay, so just doing a little bit of a deep dive on some of our aspects. So each of the key focus area there has got a project charter or a plan on a page, as we like to call them. So these are very high level in terms of this is your focus area. These are the key issues and concerns that have been identified. And this is some of the key activities that we need to do in order to improve our score next time round, or our performance rather than score. The table on the right is a deeper dive in terms of asset data cleansing, for example. So what we've done with this is we've taken every aspect of data that we think is important to us. We've prioritized it in terms of what area does it cover. And then we've managed to give an overall score of importance, because there's quite a lot to be done in the data area, in order to prioritize our next steps and actions. I'm pleased to say that some of the actions are now in play. We've got some resources in which are helping us in terms of identifying gaps within our info system, plugging those gaps on a prioritized basis. So we're using our own staff, some contracted staff, and summer students to fill some of those gaps that we've got. Next slide, please. Just moving on to environmental monitoring just for a moment, and some of the quick wins that we can get for them as well. So asset register, again, is one of the key things. At this moment in time, environmental monitoring are using spreadsheets, which are okay, but not the best. So a quick win for us is to get the environmental monitoring assets into our asset data register and info. Asset condition assessment, so we're doing that within ICM already. Within EM, it's an area that we can focus on in terms of our radio stations, monitoring stations, etc. What condition are they in? Are they at risk of failure, etc. The risk management aspect has not been defined yet in terms of what we can do to improve that area. It's something that we're looking at. Information systems as well. So using info, for example, as I've discussed in ICM area, utilizing info in the same way that the ICM team use it will be helpful for EM. And then improvement planning is one of the other aspects that's been picked up for a quick win and improvement. Next slide, please. So in summary, Council has invested quite heavily in terms of asset management. That's in terms of the info system and some of the roles and responsibilities which I mentioned before, the maintenance planner and the reliability engineer. They have paid dividends. Like I said, a plus 2% movement is quite significant in a short period of time. So the investment is paying off. The maturity review included input from operational project management staff and others this time round, which is unusual. It's normally constrained and restrained to the asset management team. So we've gone for a broader church of opinion. And we strongly believe that within the next 12 to 18 months, with the action plans that we've got in place and some of the initiatives already ongoing, that our maturity score will improve quite considerably and move closer towards our target score. Thank you.
Any questions? Chris?
Yes, thanks for that presentation. My question, I guess, is more financially oriented, but it also is associated with risk. When we had the last valuation done, I think it was in the 22 year, Janine?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we had a desktop reval done as at 30th of June 2022.
22, yeah.
And then we've had the full revaluation, which is in the agenda today, as at of December 2022.
So my question, when with the 22 valuation, there was some significant variations between the original numbers that were presented and finally recorded in the Regional Council for the revaluation. Will this work that's being undertaken allow for the records to be more accurately reflective of the actual infrastructure that's out there in terms of the total? And I know they're all different, but the variations that have proposed last time were so significant that would. My question on the accuracy of the records, not the structures themselves, but actually the cost capture. Is the work that's being done is going to ensure greater level of accuracy in those numbers or not?
Yeah, just in terms of cost capture, in terms of maintenance, etc., Infor itself is doing that for us now at a more accurate level. So any activity that's undertaken on an asset is being recorded, and we can track that all the time. Just in terms of the valuation accuracy, in terms of total asset base or individual aspects, the data cleansing aspect, which I talked about there in terms of we're going to do a lot of work around the data aspect of things, that will improve it significantly as well. Because we are averaging some of our assets. For example, pump stations, we average them on sides rather than actuals. Same with some of our pipes, they're averaged. This initiative, especially around the asset data cleansing, will improve that significantly. We'll have a lot more detail around that. And just as for instance, like I said, I work with a lot of other councils as well. Their asset register is probably in a similar position, if not worse position than what ours is. So we're not that bad overall.
That's not an excuse for not having it accurate. I'm sorry. Will the system identify the difference in costs for different catchment areas? For example, if you go north, they have to cut materials in for maintenance, which adds significantly to costs, whereas other places they use the dredgings, dry them out over 2 or 3 years, and then use a much lower cost base. Will that be reflected in individual catchments or not?
We're capturing that in a slightly different way. So this time around with the valuations process, the stock banks are now there, were maintained and refurbished, was a key aspect that we picked up with the valuer. And our project management systems are capturing those differences in terms of unit rates. So where we have got site source materials, we're capturing that and we can understand a cost. And then when we're bringing in quarry materials, we've got that data as well. In terms of the valuation process, it tends to be averaged across the region. But what I'm signaling is we are capturing more data and we should be more accurate in the future.
I guess that's the point of my question. I don't think the averaging is fair on the various members of catchment who are being rated direct rates on the charges which are being incurred in each particular catchment. So, you know, means people in the lower Waikato may be subsidising others with a higher cost catchment area. And it all comes back to the economics. You know, this is going down a different path to what we should be discussing here. But at the end of the day, people are going to have to make a decision on the economics of continuing to operate in particular catchments where the costs of operating are much higher.
Without being 100% certain on my answer here, in terms of the projects we're doing for stock banks in particular, we can put that down to particular schemes if we need to. But in terms of the valuation process, it's not been captured at that level. The standard process in terms of valuation is that averaging aspect, but we can dive down and drive down deeper if required.
Well, valuation should be asset specific. You don't average building costs over a range of buildings. If you're a building, you should be doing the same in infrastructure assets either, but that's to be honest. Yep.
Just had a question about demand forecasting. I just saw on the spider diagram, it was one of the lower ones and it didn't feature in the next steps of what was necessary. Just keen to understand that one not being that high priority at this point, despite being lower in score.
Yeah, well, basically, you can't do everything at once, and you've got particular focus areas which you aim at, and that's informed by both risk and benefit. So we are doing things in terms of demand management and demand forecasting in the background on other areas, but in terms of our maturity score, priority areas we've decided on as being those 4. But it doesn't mean it's mutually exclusive and that we're not doing other things in other areas. They're just our main focus areas for now.
Yeah, sure, and they look quite logical to me. Like there was nothing to criticise there. I was just curious about that one. Thank you.
Robbie. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to support what Chris was saying, because targeted rates is paying for that infrastructure and you'd be taking targeted rate money to subsidise different catchments, which that becomes a real issue with some of these, especially foreshore, and they're actually, their assets, their valuation has been moved to another catchment. I don't think they'd appreciate being told that very much as targeted rate payers. So I definitely think that needs to be reassessed and how Chris was saying it. Thank you.
So, sorry, can I just give some supplementary information on the valuations? The actual asset base itself is divvied up in different ways. So we've got a whole of WRC asset valuation, which demarks it in terms of what the asset type is and its value. And then it's also cut slightly differently in terms of the zonal components of that as well. So from a zone perspective, the assets in that zone are registered and logged in a slightly different way. So we are capturing the asset value and the depreciation of those assets by zone. Oh yeah, there's still averages in there. That's just the way these things are done, unfortunately, in New Zealand, and probably in the UK as well, where I come from, to be honest.
What I'm meaning is I don't want to see one catchment like Lower Waikato then being subsidised by Hauraki subsidising Lower Waikato. That cannot happen. That's what I was getting to.
Through you, Mr. Chair, can I maybe clarify a difference, I guess, between valuation, which is effectively the purpose of the valuation. It informs insurance. It also gives us a depreciation amount, which is what we fund. And that funding goes to support a program of work, which will include costs that are specific to the nature of the assets that are being maintained, constructed, whatever it may be. At that end, that funding is able to be captured and reported and analysed at a zone level so that we can see how is our depreciation funding matching with our capital works program. So we shouldn't see cross subsidisation in terms of the way that those activities are funded. It is the blunt instrument of asset valuation, which, as we see in the report, is compliant with best practice in terms of accounting standards, asset valuation standards and the like. But when we actually peel it back into those geographical areas, we can go, this is what we've collected from a funding perspective through depreciation that is a consequence of the valuation, and this is what we've spent, and how is that matching?
Chris?
Yeah, sorry, Janine, my concern is that the numbers that I saw, there was a cost per cubic metre for work which was carried out in the Lower Waikato region of 260 odd dollars a metre, cubic metre, as against other areas where you had a cost, say, $26 a cubic metre. They're being used, those two figures are being used in a spreadsheet to provide an average across the region. And that's the issue that I have some concerns about, because that suggests if that's what's happening, and we arrived at a figure of $53 or whatever it was across the region, that included costs from the Lower Waikato, Middle Waikato and the Upper Waikato area. That stands to reason that we are going to get some anomalies across the various catchments if we use that costing model, valuation model, sorry.
But through you, Mr. Chair, I come back to the point that the valuation is driving a depreciation amount, which gives us something that we fund, and then we do the works in situ on an actual cost basis. So it's the matching between the revenue that we have in and the costs that we spend based on the asset in situ with those conditions, and the difference between those might be borrowing that we need to top up that depreciation fund. So I hear the concerns, but I think in practical terms, from a financing perspective, it's a sort of separation from the valuation process to the actual asset management processes that are undertaken.
So let me just get this straight. You're saying the valuation drives the depreciation charge,
Correct.
and then by zone that is spent. So there's no cross subsidisation, just a striking of the.
That's right. So each zone has its own reserve funds, and what we see from a capital perspective is money coming in through the depreciation that we fund. So that's our revenue in, and then a capital works spend out, and we can match those things geographically to make sure that it's not a cross subsidisation.
Is that spend in comparison to the funding reported anywhere? I don't recall seeing that.
It's reported through, and again at an organisational level, through the financial prudence regulations that council's required to report, which compare your total depreciation expense with your total planned and actual capital program to make sure it's the test to say, are you actually maintaining your assets? So that's probably, to be fair, the only place that is. It's a good point. We can pull that out in terms of maybe through the Finance and Services Committee of a little bit more understanding around that capital funding and how it works.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. I'll have an offline discussion with Janine
Okay.
about it. I think probably the best idea rather than boring everybody to death.
Thank you.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, though, I do think it is really important that from my perspective, I'm really keen to ensure that that Councillor Hughes and also Councillor Cookson, just given their respective committee responsibilities, want to make sure that they are comfortable with the approach in this and that all of their queries have been followed up on and answered. So if we can make sure that that loop gets closed, that'd be most appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions of the team? No? Can we have a mover and seconder for the resolution to receive the report, please? Thank you, Pamela. Jennifer will second. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. We'll move now on to, thank you for that presentation. Very interesting.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just to make sure that that does get covered off, is that going to be recorded in our action list?
I think it has to be. We need a report back that it's been done.
That it's been done. So I
Yeah.
just want to make sure that
Yeah.
we note
And
that in the minutes.
I've captured it as self in terms of capital funding.
Right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
External audit update. Who's doing this?
So I will start, and we've got Clarence here. So I think Clarence has been in here before, but I guess just opportunity to formally introduce. So Clarence Susan, who's our new appointed auditor, starting with the audit of the 22-23 annual report. So Clarence and the team have been on site for a little while now and progressing through that work. The purpose of this report is to present the management report from the audit for the year ended 30 June 2022, noting the delays that we had in that process and the final adoption by Council only in June this year of the annual report. And so we've now received and are presenting for you the management report associated with that. I think in general, the matters that are raised in there are of a reasonably minor nature. Staff's comments are noted in terms of acceptance of a number of the points that have been made, and we will continue to track and report those back to you. Set out in the report the key dates in terms of the 22-23 annual report audit, which as I say, we are in the throes of at the moment and making good progress through that. The process has started later than we would normally see for WRC. Normally we would commence the audit in August and aim for an end of September adoption. What we are on track for is adoption within the statutory timeframe of the 31st of October, but pretty much at the line of that. I've included in here for reference the issue around audit fees, which has been challenging for the sector, and I'm sure for Clarence as an appointed auditor of having to front the conversation as well. So the changes that have been landed in that regard, which sees a phasing in of the proposed audit fee increases so that by year 3, all of the engagement from an Office of the Auditor General perspective, they are at a full cost recovery position. We've noted there that what has been agreed is that at the end of this year's audit, we will sit down and do a review of how that has gone to make sure that the effort that has been assumed moving forward is appropriate for the completion of an effective and efficient audit review and sign off. So with that, whether Clarence, you've got any points that you would like to make?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, I think you captured everything. I think the big thing on the fees were that we agreed that at the end of this audit, we will sit down, have the discussion, see where we can actually find improvements. I say both sides. So sometimes we get information in a certain format that is not the easiest to work with. That will then, previously, we would have taken the time to cleanse the data and that sort of things, which takes extra audit effort. But if we can talk to management and they can prepare the information in a better format, then we can save time. So it's things like that that we'll be working with. And also because there was an adjustment on our base hours, making sure that we are recovering the full effort, that's an estimate. So it will be quite good to have the sit down, see, was it too high, was it too low? I don't expect it to be too low, but at least then we can have that discussion at the end of it. And then just on the management report, which is, as you noted, it is pretty much all minor issues, but it's all in the infrastructure area, which I think is something which is quite topical at the moment, and it is your biggest investment. And on the revaluations and all of that, I know that we are busy with doing the audit on the revaluations, looking at the unit rate, and it becomes very complicated when you try to break it down in different zones. So there's a big portion of it is for the valuation is the averaging of it, but it's also based on the actual areas. And not all of that asset value gets depreciated. That's also quite important to remember that won't drive any of your maintenance. And then the actual cost, like Jenny said, will actually be captured in your maintenance contracts.
Questions? Chris, sorry.
Yes, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Project Reboot has come live as from the July, which will be the start of this current financial year. What has been allowed for, if anything, in the conversion of the order, the conversion transfer of data across, but more particularly, one expect system that we're going to have greater efficiencies, some criticism, doing things correctly of presentation of data for audit. Has that fact that we've got a new system which hopefully is going to produce data for auditable format, has that been reflected in the projected fees?
So the short answer is no. It's based on historical time, and that's why we have agreed to that open book exercise. So if there is definite savings in time, then that will be reflected in the hours going forward.
Any further questions? Clarence,
Yeah, sorry, Paul. Actually, that was a really good question, Chris. So will you have a whole lot of, have to redo all your compliance tests? You've got new systems, you have to read all the walkthroughs and the documentation?
Yes, we would. If we are planning to rely on controls, then we will have to do the system descriptions. We'll do the system descriptions in any case and then identify the controls. So we will assess if we have to redo it, if it's more favorable to do a substantive approach instead of a controls-based approach. So we are looking at our approach as well.
There's a point which may be sort of immaterial in value, but there's that point about the title of properties where they're not. and management seems to be comfortable with this historical thing and it's sort of well known, but is there any risk around this?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think this issue has been, councillors may be familiar with the topic in terms of through our long-term plan meetings of an investment call to do more work around understanding these assets on private land and what our role and responsibility is, what the consequence of that is. So that is a specific activity that's planned to look at that and understand.
Thank you. Clarence, the 23 audit going well from your point of view?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so we have been on site for the last 2 weeks. We've started on the revaluations. There's been a change in the revaluation report again, but I believe it's more between the different zones and the overall value will be the same. So we are looking, it's quite time consuming finding the right rates or confirming the rates, as well as then making sure that the other side of the equation, which is the length, and that matches up with the fixed asset register. It was really good to hear the improvements that's being made in the asset management planning and maintenance and capturing the data condition, because that helps the whole audit process as well, especially moving into the long-term plan. But to come back to your answer, yes, we're on track and the audit is going well. We're a bit behind with our final reviews, not final reviews, but the reviews of our planning, not planning, the execution, but we're working to catch up on that.
So you're not expecting to have a problem meeting the deadline?
I'm not expecting to have a problem. At the moment, we have the full team, and I haven't had any calls on any of my staff like in the previous years. And just on the timing, yes, it is an improvement on the last 2 or 3 years. It's not where we want to be, so I acknowledge that, and it's not where council wants to be. We want to be back in our normal timeframes, but trying to catch up to the end of October at least, we can start our planning on the long-term plan, hopefully before end of this year, which puts us in a better position to catch up next year.
I was encouraged to see your willingness to engage in an open book exercise on the fee. But I was in a meeting yesterday for another council and the OAG were present and they saw problems in providing us with benchmarks that were going to help us to resolve that position. Do you see that's going to be possible or is that going to be problematic? So we're going to be putting a lot of reliance on this process that maybe won't deliver the results we want.
So yes and no. Typical answer, sorry. What we're doing, when we set the fees to start off with, it was based on historical information, as I said, but it's also compared with the rest of the sector. Now, there is some specific or professional judgments going into the makeup of the team, director time, manager time. Do you use a post-qualified person to lead the team? Do you need somebody with more experience? What is the complexities in this? For regional council, normally your biggest risks are your infrastructure evaluations because it's so diverse. I can't take unit rates from yourself and compare it with Christchurch. We tried that. It doesn't work. It's just too far. And comes back to your point exactly, between just the zones in your own region. It's so different. So that takes a lot of time and expertise. But then also what we can do is to say where you sit in the range of regional councils with the team mix, because that's when what the Auditor General did when they did the moderation, was to make sure that it's comparable with other councils. So it's the district councils, regional councils, city councils, and in the specific groups as well. And I'm sure that at the end of this audit, we can do that again to look at the actual time spent for the different audits.
I've got 2 issues with that. One, Mark Maloney said in a meeting that I was at that the moderation process the OAG ran wasn't really effective, which concerned me a lot. And also, when you look at the actual time of last year's audit, it was phenomenal. Just out of all, multiple of about 3 of the budget. So I'm just concerned, we've got to make sure that in going into this process, we have reasonable confidence that all the time's good time, and there's not a whole lot of inefficiency crept in there. How do you intend that we address that?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So what we are planning to do is to see where Audit New Zealand's been inefficient, and now I don't know exactly what happened last year, but I'm sure that there was a lot of staff turnover, a lot of people picking up work and then somebody else having to finish it off, which means duplication of effort and things like that, and using people that maybe was new to New Zealand as a whole without local government experience, all of that. So we acknowledge that, and that is things that we will be looking at specifically. I mean, Jenny knows who's been on site. Do we have the same people? Did we change our approach? Did we duplicate effort? That sort of thing. So because we need to make sure that in our processes, we acknowledge when there's a duplication of effort, and that is what we'll be trying to achieve.
From my perspective, it seems that some appointed auditors are better than others, maybe at the project management side of the audit, but that makes a huge difference, both to Audit New Zealand and to councils.
I can't agree. I can't disagree with you. It is about project management,
Yeah.
and we are trying to be on site more. So with the COVID lockdowns and that, to audit remotely is not efficient, not for council staff or for the auditors. The other problem is because we are a training organisation, if you have new auditors starting and they're on their own and they don't know what they're asking, they don't know what they're receiving. So we have the team in the same room. So we are going back to the previous ways of auditing where hopefully there's training on site.
Thank you. Chris?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. If I can just circle back to a comment that you made regarding values that are applied in Christchurch are appropriate to be applied in the Waikato. I understand the soil types, the topography, the catchments are different. I would have thought a cubic metre of dirt in Christchurch cost would be the same as a cubic metre of dirt in Waikato. What may help the council, if the officer was able to prepare a schedule, various valuations throughout New Zealand, so that the council can sit down, the council staff responsible for those can sit down and compare areas, and then maybe talk to those with lower costs, and do maybe some learning experiences out of it. So it's just a thought. The OAG is in a position to be able to capture that data. Maybe our staff can do it anyway by talking. Yeah, just a thought. Maybe you can add some value.
Mr. Chair, we actually have that database. It's been started 2 or 3 years ago because of the big focus on trying to get unit rates tested and compared. So we are compiling that. It is an ongoing process. Regional councils is a bit more difficult because it is only 7 regional councils. So it's not as easy as district councils and city councils, but we are doing that, definitely.
Thank you. And you're prepared to share that with council staff, regional council staff?
I'm sure that I'll be able to share it. I'll just have to confirm that with the OAG that it is publicly available.
Thank you. Any further questions of Clarence? No. Well, can we have a mover and seconder to receive that report? Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Chris. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. We're now going to take a 10-minute break. Excuse me. So if we can just be back in 10 and grab a drink. Our